And I hope that that message can help some of you out there, no matter where you fall in terms of your feelings about the Final Fantasy VII Remake project and this particular game, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. No matter where you fall in your opinion on whether this is a disgrace to the original game and undermining all of its important themes, and whether that's how you feel or whether you feel, no, this is a really groundbreaking, fresh take on this set of characters and world that I loved growing up, and I really like feeling excited about not knowing that some things might be different, and being able to theorize that with my particular in-group that's why we appreciate this art that we gathered around. This is the thing that we appreciated about it. No matter where you fall there, you don't have to get involved in the toxicity. You don't have to escalate it to a point where it does some real damage to real people. There is a vote happening right now on our Patreon for the game that we will play after Planescape Torment. That vote will only be live of the time of the upload of this video for like one more day, maybe two, because we will need to start playing the next game this weekend and preparing for it, because we're done with Planescape now. We're moving on to the next thing so that we can be ready for the next series. So we are doing a vote between Xenosaga 2 and 3 back to back. So that's option 1, finishing the Xenosaga series. Or Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. Those are the two options up on Patreon. If you would like to vote, please head to our Patreon, and at the $5 subscription level, you can you get like voting privileges in terms of deciding what we play. Well, Kaysen, our original target date for Planescape Torment was February 22nd, which I think is today. We're pushing that back one more week. Yeah. We need one more week to prepare for that. So, unfortunately for us, we have to find a way to stretch this out one more time.
I don't know how we're going to do that.
We have to figure out some way to find something to talk about for one more hour or ish to give content to these people.
There is a game coming out soon.
There's a lot of games coming out soon. Which one are you thinking about?
Oh, there's a game coming out soon I think it's coming out really soon. It's getting some super good reviews. Like, what's coming out soon? Do you know? Are you aware?
You talking about RPGs? Or what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's mostly an RPG.
Unicorn Overlord. That's March 8th, I think, is a couple weeks. I'm going to play that. It's a new demo, actually. It's really good.
Oh, no. I think it literally comes out tomorrow after this goes live.
Oh. Wait a minute. I know Dragon Dogma 2, but that's like the end of March. What comes out at the end of February? Big RPG.
Yeah, it might be the first day of March.
A lot of people talking about it.
It's Final Fantasy something around there.
Final Fantasy?
Yeah, Final Fantasy. Not 17. It's Final Fantasy.
There's a 7.
Actually, I don't remember.
There's a 7. There's a 7 in there somewhere.
It's 7 Retrograde.
Rebirth.
Did that one already come out? Rebirth. It's Rebirth.
Yeah.
Coming out.
Yeah. So
talk about that game?
I didn't want to. If you insist, I guess we will. I gotta take a sip of water before we.
Oh, the reviews are rolling in.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know how to start talking about this. Final Fantasy VII Remake came out in 2020. It was 4 years ago. And we did well, I don't think you were on it because you haven't actually played Final Fantasy VII Remake yet.
Oh,
but
I still haven't.
Our channel had, not this one, the archive channel, which we were uploading to at the time, had 2 podcast episodes dedicated to talking about that game. They were both very, very, very freaking long. Had guests, And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I would say that the reputation, well, at least mine, you weren't on them, so it's not you. My reputation as a Final Fantasy fan, a channel that creates Final Fantasy content, uh,
Mhm.
legitimately took quite a hit from those two videos at the time. So I've said basically everything about that game that I think is required for me to say. Like to talk anymore about like the actual project itself would just be belaboring points that at this point I feel are totally pointless to make. I've come to a conclusion that I'm personally not interested in this project. So why would it be an effective use of time to engage with the thing that I'm not interested in? However, however, there is one topic in the field that sort of orbits the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, this trilogy of games that they're doing. That is something that I am very interested in talking about soon. Uh, and it is the reason why that reputation that maybe I once had took the hit that it did. Why was it that my opinion on that game created a divide that made us, for a while, have to take a bit of a hiatus from our podcast? We went, I think it was like 4 months that we didn't make any shows at all.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Because it wasn't just that, it was also some of our thoughts on other RPGs that were coming out, like the remake of Xenoblade Chronicles and things like that. And it isn't even just this topic that I want to talk about isn't even just related to video games. It relates to just human nature, and that's why it's an interesting topic to me. Trying to understand why people get so uh, uh, what's the right word for this? Because I want to be like fair and not try to make any, because it's all about social sorting. Let's just start there. I
Sure.
want to talk about social sorting, which is a sort of like branch of tribalism, right? Um,
Right.
and the fact that at the kind of current point in time, I think we're seeing this happening to a degree that is sort of unprecedented for the human race because of the internet and social media. And this is also sort of a riff off of a lot of stuff we talked about in last week's episode. Because
Yes,
we
I
were
remember.
talking about the internet and the way that that's changed gaming culture and all these sorts
Yep.
of things. And a lot of people really enjoyed that conversation. I was really happy with a lot of the responses we were getting on that video. Um, People were, really interested in hearing more about that. So this is going to be more about how has because when we were growing up, I think every person I have met in real life, like that I have met in person, talked to face about the game
Mhm.
Final Fantasy VII, basically agrees with everything that I think about this remake project, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there's this whole other sort of like set of people on the internet that I was so surprised to find out were vehemently disagreeing with me on those points. And I've had 4 years now to think that over, to see my views challenged um, with a high degree of vehemence. A
Yeah.
lot of people didn't want to engage with our content anymore who once liked us. Again, not you, it was me because you haven't even played the game. And you still want to, from what I understand.
I do. I want to play it when I'm back in Japanese, and I want to play the whole game in Japanese. That'll be fun.
Yeah. So, there may be in the future some possible content based around the remake project. It's just that I probably won't contribute much to that. That'd be kind of be a case in thing. But uh, I think since then, from like 2020 to now. I mean, it started a little bit before then. My sort of like real intense observation of social discourse, like the way that people engage with each other about disagreements online. Um, it's gotten to a level that concerns me so much that like I really really feel, well, I don't want to say scared or nervous in the sense that like I'm afraid of some oncoming like civil war or anything. Like these things happen. It's not like I'm sitting here terrified about that. That's it happens. But what I think my mind has been trying to wrap itself around is, why is this happening? I don't remember it being this way before. There was like a certain point, and there was a hinge point, I feel like. And we got into this a little bit last week, but it was social media in particular that has sort of like
Right.
been this force multiplier to a degree that's just like blowing up at like an ever increasing rate all the time. And it's not even just for politics or social issues or the things that are really really important in life. It's for like the console wars that we participated in as kids, the way that we talked
Yeah.
about it then versus the way I see people talking about it now. And sports teams, rivalries, things like that. I remember the way I used to see that engaged when I was growing up versus the way I see people doing that online now. Um, and Final Fantasy VII Remake falls into a similar category where you see these incredible divisions in the fan base, people fighting and legitimate death threats and like real nasty discourse that is just like toxic as it gets. People doxing each other online. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. That all stems from this thing that I loved when I was a kid
Right.
so much. And so I think what I'd rather focus on is, as this game is coming out and that sort of discourse is sure to begin in the coming days here, what can we do to step back for a second and not contribute to that kind of toxic discourse? What can we do just in our little sphere of influence to sort of contribute positively to that discourse if we're going to participate in it at all? So that's kind of where I want to go with this. I want to pass it to you for a second and maybe get some of your thoughts. I don't even know if you've seen what I've seen, and so this may kind of be a little bit out of your wheelhouse. So, as in regards to that,
I haven't.
Yeah,
I've heard like the game coming out, it's getting good reviews. Everyone's saying, "Hey, if you didn't like the first remake, like you have to try this one. Apparently, it's going to be a lot more truthful and a lot better." Something like that. I haven't seen any of what you're talking about, other than don't really follow video game stuff anymore.
yes.
So I just haven't seen it really at all.
Well,
I see it elsewhere though, as you pointed out.
I think that actually leads into a really good launching point for this discussion, which is
Good.
it's kind of been the prevailing idea in the last maybe decade or so that the internet and social media has sort of created these bubbles in which people live, that algorithms track the things that you like and click on, and that in doing so feed you more of those things that you like and click on. And in doing
It does do that.
Yeah, it does. But let me kind of come full circle on this. So the idea was that the algorithms are putting us all into these echo chambers, and that because of this, we are hearing more and more and more, or being reaffirmed all the time, the things we believe, and that is sort of radicalizing people. That thought has been challenged by more recent studies, which are saying, yes, the algorithms feed you more things you like, but it's not what you like necessarily. It's what you click on and engage with. And
Ha ha
unfortunately,
ha.
we
That's
do a
a good
lot
point.
more clicking and engaging on things that we disagree on,
Yes.
or that are threatening to us, or scary, or that
Yeah.
that are opposed to our worldview, because those things feel threatening to us.
And then you see more of that
Yes.
because you
So
engage with it.
what's actually happening is not that we're falling into these bubbles online, but that the bubbles that we exist in our real lives, which I'll get to in a second, are being poked and prodded at constantly when you're online, because you're engaging a lot. Of course, you engage with a lot of things you like, but you're also seeing a lot of things that go, oh no, what's that? And that's especially the way media works, right? Like news. They're constantly bombarding you with like bad news headlines that make you go, oh my gosh, what's happening? And that this is actually what is sort of creating this incredible division between people, and the reason why our public discourse has become so poisonous, because we are feeling almost constantly threatened and attacked all the time as we use our phones throughout the day. And that in your real life, where you have a much smaller and isolated community, whether this is your family, your small social groups you belong to, your church, whatever it is, in that community, which is much, much smaller, you're surrounded by people who are much more like-minded to you. And that social bubble is being poked and prodded at when you're on the internet all the time. I thought that was fascinating. And it sort of flips the table a little bit on what I thought was the cause of the problem. Because this is
Mm.
something, I mean, we've had, I don't know how many games we've covered now on the podcast, but it comes up fairly frequently. And we've talked about it a
Yeah.
lot in a lot of different podcasts. This sort of tribalistic tendency that is bred into us. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our nature. It's instinctual, right? People, in order to survive, we're talking about tens, hundreds of thousands of years ago, relied on the cooperation of their small tribes to survive. Being isolated was the most dangerous thing. So your best chance for survival was to get a part of a strong group, a strong local group, that
And
and
cooperate,
and,
yeah.
and cooperate with those people. And if you did that the best, the team that did that best won. They survived longer, right? So it's literally bred into us to seek out tribes. This is a part, it's just a part of human nature. We can't help it. Our DNA makes us do it.
Yeah.
Now, as we left the small tribes and villages and kind of came into larger civilizations, cities, things like that, you start to have, again, it's still a fairly isolated thing. I think a lot of people didn't necessarily travel beyond the small kingdoms and territories they belonged to, cities they were born in, things like that. So you still had a fairly isolated group of people, but it was much larger. So you would have a little bit more diversity of thought, people challenging what you think. And that's healthy. That's actually something that came up on a recent podcast as well. I think it was during Tactics Ogre, right? People were like, well, conflict, not all conflict is bad. And we were like, yes, that's
Right.
true. Like, you actually need conflict. A healthy amount of conflict is good, because you can't just have your own viewpoint validated all the time. There's no growth that way. You need
Yeah.
to be challenged. You need to feel like you need to evolve or adapt to changing circumstances in order for your local group, tribe, whatever, to continue thriving and growing and succeeding. So there needs to be a certain amount of healthy conflict, but there's also a certain amount of social glue that is required to keep those dissenting opinions together and unified in a way that that kind of creates an equilibrium between those things, and the people can continue to grow and thrive. However, with the internet, and not necessarily the early internet, which which is what they're saying more closely resembled that kind of larger but still isolated community, right? The internet was highly fractured early on with just thousands of forums and places where you
Yeah.
could go and talk to people. And so it was still fairly successful at giving you the opportunity to meet people you wouldn't otherwise and have your ideas challenged while still keeping you contained in this little group that more or less still had a social glue, a thing to which we were congregating around that unified us. That topic, that
Right.
thing that you were interested in. Let's call it a Final Fantasy VII forum,
Sure.
right? But
That's
then
apt.
social media took all of those fractured, isolated communities and started bringing them all into one gigantic town square in which you were
Yeah.
being constantly bombarded by lots of different groups with whom,
Yep.
many of whom you would not agree. And that this is the cause of this sort of rampant, poisonous social discourse that we're having. I
Well,
found
that's
that to
interesting
be
because it's
fascinating.
nuanced. It's a little bit different take. It's still similar. It's still social media is like something of a poison, but it's more something like it's in a little bit of a different way than I think most people think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we have these gigantic places where all the people are now congregating from the small communities, right? You find YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and whatever else, these giant places now where I can
Yep.
come across a gaming community, maybe a Final Fantasy VII centered sort of community that has a very different reason for appreciating that game than the reasons that I had. Right? So when I said earlier, every person
Yeah.
I've met in real life, face to face, agrees with me on the things I think about Final Fantasy VII, there is a very good reason for that. That's because my brain sorted people I was meeting in real life and located, aha, there's the person who thinks like me. I'm going to be friends with that person. We have things in common. I like you.
Right.
I don't
You're a good guy.
I don't waste my time in real life over here arguing with this person who had a different of opinion than me. I just kind of went on with my day and didn't
Right.
think about it. So my brain socially sorted the people I encountered in real life and created the bubble we're talking about, in which I started to think, yeah, I know what this game, the real value of this game or the real reasons why it's great. And everybody I know also agrees with me about that. But it's not because everybody agrees with me about it. It's because my brain did this work that I wasn't really even conscious of to find the people who do agree with me on this. And we bonded because of that agreement on that central reason why we appreciated the game. But this was also happening for all these other people had totally different reasons for appreciating the game. Let's take two particular reasons that someone might appreciate Final Fantasy VII as good examples. I would say a lot of the people, well, you and me, for instance, Kason and I, and then the people who are in our Discord who came into our community are really centered on strong thematic underpinning. What is the core central theme of this game? What is it trying to say? What is the story really about at its core? That had a message that spoke to me, that made me rethink things about my life, that made me ponder about the sacredness of life itself. You know,
Yeah.
you also have other people, let's just say there was a very sort of minor dating simulation element to this game
Mm.
that most people know about if you've played the original, where depending
Right.
on how you answer questions, there could be a different person who would end up on a little date with you in the gold saucer. That resembled, to some degree, minor degree, like dating simulation games of the time, right? Sort of like took a little piece of that genre and sort of like just incorporated it into this. And now you have people who really got into it for that reason. They love the relationship aspects. You know, which girl does Cloud like? Which girl is he going to end up with? To be honest with you, now that I really think about it, I don't know if this is true for you, Case. It'd be interesting if it was, because we were playing this right into that age where we're coming into puberty and starting to get into girls and stuff, right? So the first time I played the game, I named Cloud Mike, and I named Eris and Tifa the two girls I had a crush on at school.
Oh, I kind of remember that. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Huh. I actually changed the names of the characters to people I know, and sort of, okay, there's these two girls in the game. I like this girl at school. I'm going to name them those girls' names. So even I participated in that particular element of the game to some degree at the time. Ultimately,
and then which one you go on a date with became kind of a big deal, I guess?
Yes, totally. Right? So just from remembering the fact that even though what ended up being the prevailing reason why that game resonated with me as strongly as it did was not that, right? Any future playthrough I did, I just named the characters their actual names. I didn't try to role play in that sense the way that maybe I tried the first time. I can see why certain people might have latched on to the other as being the reason why they liked the game as much as they did. And now you get this whole group of people who are growing up and finding within their own real life bubbles people who also loved the game for that reason, right? And they start to think, yeah, everybody likes Final Fantasy VII because what's fun to talk about is what girl does Cloud end up with? Is it Eris? Is that the better pairing? Or is it Tifa? Is that the better pairing? And now we got Zack kind of thrown into this too, right? With like Crisis Core and things that came out after that. And so now we've got it's the same thing that happened with Twilight, where they came up with those teams, right? And they combined the name of the guy and the girl.
Yeah. Pattinson. Sorry.
What was the name of the character?
Edward and Jacob. Jacob and Edward. Yeah.
But what was the team? You were like team this or that, and you
Jacob and Edward. You're team Jacob or team Edward.
But they didn't combine it with the name of Bella or whatever. Okay, maybe they didn't do it in that.
Oh gosh, they probably did. I can't remember.
Dude, that's what I was trying to remember. Because what they do in Final Fantasy VII is they go Clarith.
Because it's Bella and Edward.
Right, they go Clarith, right, which is a combination of Cloud and Eris.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard this.
Yes.
Where do you go on the internet? I've never heard this before.
See, this is what I'm talking about.
That's funny.
This is kind of my whole point.
Clarith, and then what would the other one be? Clefa?
Yes. I think.
Really?
I think that's it.
Oh, that's funny.
But you also have Zack in there, where it's like Zack Aerith, right? Anyway, the whole point that I'm trying to make is that you never went to that particular town square where people are like literally at each other's throats, and you're sitting here like, whoa, this is freaking crazy. What's going on? You are probably at some other town square debating some other topic elsewhere. And so when it comes to this particular topic, you're sort of living in the bubble that Mike's in my bubble, and maybe my brother's in here, and my other friend who's played this game is in here, and that's my Final Fantasy VII bubble, and this is why we liked the game. This is the reason the game's cool. So what
you know what? I do remember I was around 16 or so, 17 maybe, and then there were rumors of a Middle Earth Online game.
Yeah.
That was going around at the time since like 2003, maybe. And I remember I would get into debates about Lord of the Rings, specifically Lord of the Rings. And the specific thing that I would fight the hardest on was whether or not Middle Earth Online should have player versus player combat, or whether it should always be players fighting NPCs.
Yeah.
And I was hard on the PvP, I think, which I not anymore would be. But
so
I got
you
into
wanted
it.
people to fight against other people.
Forums. I would argue with specific people who disagreed with me, and I was ruthless.
I want to touch
I
on
care.
this too.
I never even played the game. When it came out, it was Lord of the Rings Online. I never played once ever.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point too. You never actually played the game, and yet you had an
I had huge
incredibly
opinions.
massive, important, passionate opinion about this game you never even played. This is a great
Yes.
point because there's a lot of times where I question whether the people I'm talking to have actually played the game in question all the time.
Oh yeah.
Or whether or not it's because this is kind of what I'm getting at. It's not the game. That's
Right.
not what we're arguing about. It is all about an inherent thing we do of social sorting. The reason we socially sort is because we want to put ourselves into a group that give us a sense of belonging, a sense of friendship, love, whatever you want to call it, and
Right.
creating a sense of identity through which you can express yourself. These are very important things to people. I need a place where I belong, a place where I can feel I'm understood and loved, and a place that I can take from that community and use as a badge to say something about myself, to identify with and use that to create an identity for myself with. That is what people are really fighting over. It's masked under all these arguments about the merits of the game. But that's not actually what people are fighting about. They are fighting to defend their sense of identity and belonging from those who they believe are attacking that with their opinions about the game. So,
Because they don't want to be lonely.
yes. And this was happening with you for a game you hadn't even played. For some reason.
It was in development.
Yeah. For some reason, this idea that a Lord of the Rings video game, your bubble about your opinions of the Lord of the Rings property, included that if there's an online version of this, it must include PvP in order to be a part of the correct theology
I don't know.
of what
Something
Lord
like
of the
that.
Rings meant, because that's all it is too. This is true of religion. It's true of politics.
Right.
It's true of every community, every ideology, everything through which you sort yourself into.
Yeah.
This is all about
That's what
creating for yourself sense of identity, sense of belonging, sense of purpose. That's what you're really fighting for. Go ahead with what you're going to say.
Right. Well, that creates cohesion, though. It's because, and this is where you and I were talking a little bit before this came up about like what exactly maybe a solution to something like this could or ought to be. But at least to some degree, um, gosh, how do I put this? Um, like you can't avoid it.
No.
Like this is how humans are. Humans need glue to hold each other together, and glue comes from having similar opinions.
Yes.
And as much as you can, or people in general can say, "Oh, it's I don't know," can be upset about the different things, like you mentioned, different things like your ideology, your religion, your personal opinion, your the way that you self sort. It's really hard to just not self sort. That's how you end up alone with nothing. And this is how humans work. Like humans do this. We find people that we can trust that are similar to us, that will behave in a similar way, that have our back if things go south. Um, we seek that out, whether it's online or in person. And then communities will tend to do this and things will start growing. And then you've got groups that are like, oh, we're going to ally with this group and whatever, and it scales all the way up to basically all of humanity. And you can't avoid it. Like it has to be there. And I wouldn't even say it's a bad thing. It's just it can become toxic, I suppose, depending on how it's being used. But this is unavoidable.
It's not a bad thing in the way in which it evolved to be useful, which is in smaller communities. It actually is what made humans thrive in smaller communities. Everything that you believe as a person was informed one way or the other by the local culture in which you were born. You cannot avoid
100%.
that. You could
Yes.
call it indoctrination. That's probably true. What
It's
it
probably true,
was.
but I would say that that doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
It doesn't. When
Right.
humans lived in small communities, it has only become potentially a really bad thing when all of humanity is connected into one culture with so many diverse, fractured communities and cultures that they
Right.
shaped their
But
sense of
yeah.
identity from coming into direct contest and clash with thousands, millions of others every single day of your life.
Totally. Yeah. But I'm just saying that you can't have it any other way. If you want every human in the world to communicate with each other, this is the human brain. This is how humans are.
Yes. So, unfortunately, evolution works very, very, very slowly.
Yes.
So,
Very.
in order for us to succeed in the world that is developing very quickly around us, we need to be able to adapt to it. The problem is, we're not going to be able to adapt fast enough to this
Oh,
particular
never.
thing. We
Yeah.
cannot change the fact that we need to feel that social glue keeping us together, and that needs to come from rallying and uniting around a central set of ideological principles. But if we're all going to be connected, we're going to be surrounded by, again, thousands of communities who are in direct opposition to those ideological principles. So what do we
Always.
do? And here's the thing. I don't know if I want to quite get into that topic yet. That's probably where we want to leave off at the end, because Kason and I may even have differing views on how we actually tackle that problem. In fact, I'm sure many people have differing views, and that's kind of what the conversation needs to be about, because it needs to be addressed. But what is the best answer? It seems to me that we need a little bit more of a ramp, a gradient, a slow introduction
Oh, yeah.
into what we're racing into right now. We're moving into
Yeah.
it way too fast for our
I agree.
evolution to be able to help us adapt to. So,
Yeah, it's not helpful for us.
one answer, and this comes from a video that I saw recently, and I had Kason watch it before we got on here and talked about it. I will link this video in the description and maybe in a pinned comment, so that you guys can watch it, because I found it really, really fascinating. But one idea is to kind of maybe step back from these social media monopolies and empires
Yeah.
where
The big centralized websites.
yes, where all of these people are, coming in contact with each other all the time, and
Right.
fracture the internet's communities back into something more like it was at the beginning, where,
Which you can always do yourself.
yes,
That doesn't solve
yeah,
the issue for everyone around you. And unfortunately, the corporate structures are such that something like the network effect takes place as soon as you get these communities. They slowly begin to just coalesce, and at some point, you end up with just a handful. Ultimately, one if they play them naturally themselves. But things will ultimately coalesce into one thing because that's where that's where the money will go. The advertisers are like, "What? This platform has 100 million users. Of course, I'm going to advertise there, not this little one with only like 1,000 people."
yes. That is the reason, and it's the reason why
Yeah,
it would
that's
be
why.
almost impossible to, in any sort of way, to like actually break this up. So it while it might be ideally a good answer, I don't know if it's like actually effectively, even reasonably, an answer that would work, because how would you even go about doing that? How do you tell
Right, exactly.
these giant corporations that have these mega social media platforms, hey, break up your social media platform, it's better for humanity to do that? right? Like, that's not going to
Yeah,
happen.
that's not how things work.
So I don't even want to, outside of just like pitching that out there as an idea that video sort of put forth, that I thought, yeah, ideally, I think that could be a starting point. Again, and we talked about this recently too in our Tactics Ogre series. We individually cannot do anything to change the world, really. I mean, there are some people who have more power than others. Maybe you have more influence than others. There's more you can do. But for the most part, the average person watching, there's not really much within your sphere of influence that you can do to change the world or to change this aspect of human nature. The only thing you can do is change yourself.
If all you have to do is decide what to do with the time
That
that is
is
given
given
to
to you.
you.
Exactly right. So while you might not be able to reach into your DNA and manipulate the code and take this particular tribalism out of you, maybe that's a potential more short-term answer now that we're getting closer on that. But I don't know if anyone would agree to that, so maybe it's not. But gene manipulation, that sort of thing. But
That's where things will go. Like, there's no avoiding it,
yeah,
but I don't like it.
and I don't think
That's a way to
anybody,
speed up evolution to catch up.
yeah, I don't think
Who's
anybody
controlling it?
does like that idea. But
But that doesn't matter. Nobody likes the idea of artificial intelligence, like,
true.
destroying the world and humanity coming to an end. But that seems to be where we're heading. So,
So, but what you can do is at least be aware of what's really going on in you, inside of you, when you get these strong feelings, when you see these opposing views to what you believe, as this game that launches tomorrow is sure to incite. Instead of going, ooh, this person came out, I'm going to put them into the enemy box that I'm socially sorting them into. These are the idiots who don't agree with me over here, and I have to freaking fight them over this. Realize what's happening. Realize what's really happening. Take a step back from that. You have this sort of cognizant, higher thinking part of your brain right here behind your freaking forehead that you can use to go, hold on a second. Emotional part back there. This actually isn't all that serious. This is not life or death the way that my ancestors bred me to think about it. I don't have to engage, or if I do engage, I don't have to treat it as if it is at that level of a threat. It's just not necessary to do. And if we can start there, we start with ourselves, right? And say, because it's going to happen. You're going to have a feeling that comes up. You're going to see somebody who says something and you're just going to feel like annoyed. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel all those feelings. You don't have a choice in that, by the way. That's just going to happen to you. That's the part
Right.
that we're saying you can't control about your human nature. But you can control as being aware of where that's really coming from, how you go about responding to that, and not contributing to this continuing divide, this ever-growing gap between ourselves, this racing to far extremes of opinion, that in doing that leads to real, true evil acts. Because it's when you're pushed to this extreme view over here that you begin justifying acts of violence or other things as being the right thing to do, because those people are so evil or so stupid that it is necessary for me to fight them that way. That's what you're trying to avoid. You're trying to avoid your emotions becoming so boiled that it pushes you over there. And again, I'm obviously not, well, there really are legitimate death threats and doxing and like terrible stuff people do online to each other in arguments about this very game. So like, yeah, there's a lot of terrible things people do about that. But of course, I'm speaking kind of on broader terms with this. We tend to really, in recent times, it's becoming easier and easier for people to look at their fellow humans and declare them as being willfully evil people. because they have a different ideology than us. And in my experience, as somebody who has really, really tried and who has lots of friends in both extremes and a lot of places in between, and loves this person over here on this extreme just as much as this person over here, and can see all of the good qualities of those people, it's not what it's not the game that we're fighting about, really. It's not
Yeah.
the politics. That's not it. I don't think so anyway. I think relating this to sports might be actually a really good way to simplify it into what I'm trying to get to. Which sports team that you support has almost nothing to do with anything other than where you were born, most of the time. You didn't choose to like the sports team that your dad bought you baby clothes with the logo on it and raised you to like. That's not how that works. The religion that you were born into, a lot of times, dictates how you believe and see the world, right? You grew up in a culture that informed all of that. And that's not to say that there are people that don't. I mean, a lot of people convert, because what ends up happening is that in some other fractured way, in some other way that you found a sense of identity or belonging, all of a sudden the ideology you grew up believing in sort of starts poking at that bubble. And this one's a little bit more important to you. You feel a little bit more of your self-expression coming from this particular community. So you convert to that one, right? So that still happens. But for a lot of people, it's all about the circumstances into which you were born, how your parents taught you, what your local community believed, all of these things. The culture around you is what informed how you think. So you were born in Philadelphia, you like the Eagles. Now, this has been a really interesting thing for me because I was born in Houston. So as a child, I loved the Rockets, I loved the Astros, and I loved the Oilers. The Oilers don't even exist anymore. They're Tennessee Titans now.
They went to, yeah, that's right.
But then I moved to Denver, Colorado. And I remember, now I like the Nuggets and the Denver Broncos, especially because they won 2 Super Bowls while I was there. And the Diamondbacks, when we moved to Arizona.
Avalanche.
Yeah, the Avalanche. And when we moved to Arizona, then it was the Diamondbacks and the Suns and
they
Cardinals.
Yeah, the Diamondbacks won World Series. Yeah,
literally, like within the first year of living in Arizona, they did. But the more that I moved around, I feel like I got to this point where I started to see how silly that was, right? Like, there is no, like, why do I like this team? Today, the way I watch sports is very different than the way I did as a kid. To me, it was all about the colors of the uniforms, the logo, and like those things. The image of that branding was. And this was actually true. I think Landon told us about this several years ago when we were all still working together. Maybe you remember this, Kaysen, about the way that people revered tech brands in a very similar way. There was like studies of the brain that showed a very similar reaction to people who saw religious symbols, whether it be the cross or whatever religion. Again, the branding, the symbol. It's the brand.
Well, that's how brands determine their symbols. It is sort of like a religious kind of thing.
Yes.
Like Mazda. Mazda has the flame. A lot of people don't know this. That's what the M is for Mazda. It's actually a flame.
Yeah.
The reason is because there was a Zoroastrian god named Mazda, Ahura Mazda, and the symbol of Mazda was a fire, right? So literally took a different culture's religious symbol for their god and just applied it to the company and then started selling cars.
Yeah. And so this is the same exact principle through which people have been, I'll call it, manipulated or indoctrinated. Like Kaysen said earlier, that might not always be a bad thing. And I don't think it's always a bad thing in brands.
Well, it's unavoidable. If you think it's a bad thing, it's just, what do you call it? It's first principle. It's just the default state. These are the building blocks you have to work with. This is how people are.
Yes.
You do, if you're going to define that as bad inherently, you've got a problem. So you're going to have to find a way to make good out of the building blocks that exist.
Let,
That's more or less what I'm saying.
let me put it this way then. It's not the fact that humans revere symbols or use symbols as a way to represent their identities that is bad. But what can be bad is the way that bad actors use those symbols to influence people.
That is totally true.
Yes. So that's more of what I'm getting at when I say these are used to indoctrinate or manipulate people, right?
So safeguard your symbols, people.
Yes.
Don't let the bad actors. The swastika was like a really important religious
That's a
symbol
great
before.
example. It's a great example of what I'm talking
Before
about.
it changed, and it's like, guard that symbol. It's a powerful symbol. It was a very powerful symbol.
Yes.
And basically, we've lost any use of it now because somebody allowed a bad actor to use it to unify people to a horrific cause. And now the symbol is forever ruined. But that was a powerful symbol of unification and religious worship before that.
Yes.
And so symbols are important. People pay a lot of money for artists and anthropologist type people to help design their company logo, for
Yes.
example. The apple and for Macintosh, the apple,
Yeah.
that's the forbidden fruit, and that's what it is. And it's got a bite out of it because they're like, this is the knowledge. Like they're pretty open about what they're doing. But that's the symbolism that they're using for their products.
Yes. So this is just a fact about human nature and the way that we think, the way we identify ourselves with ideas, with ideologies. And again, the core reason for the individual is safety, a place to belong, a place to feel loved and understood, and a place to self-express. Those are like on the hierarchy of human needs. Those are not bad things. You need to have those things in your life to live a fulfilled life. And people find them in different places, right? So that's not bad. The thing that is becoming a problem is that when we feel like somebody is attacking those values through which we find value and fulfillment in our life, we feel the need to respond in ways that are probably not needed and that cause a lot of the destruction of our social glue on the larger town square level rather than in the small in-group level. And so we have to find a way to adapt to these circumstances. Go ahead.
I would put a little asterisk on that and say that they are not needed anymore.
Yeah.
For human survival, they evolved for a reason.
Yes.
But we like to think of ourselves beyond that. I don't know if we really are beyond a lot of that stuff. But we like to think that because in the last 3 generations, we've basically united the whole world, that now we can just be past that. But I don't know what the future holds. And things are getting interesting to where a united world is maybe seeming less likely than it was back in the 90s. And I just don't know where things go from here, I guess.
That's actually such a great
Things
point.
can get bad again. Things can get very bad again.
Yeah, that is such a great point. While the 1980s and 90s were by no means a perfect time or an era of like world peace or anything like that, I do really believe there was a sort of culmination. There was a point where there was a feeling in people's minds at the time that we might actually be progressing to a place where that could happen. We seemed to be, and again, I'm not discounting that there was still a lot of really bad stuff happening in the world. I'm strictly talking about how a lot of people felt about where we were in comparison to, especially going back just 40 years or 50 years previous to that, right? There seemed to be this idea that we had made progress that gave a promise that we were going in the right direction. And that changed.
They called it the end of history, is what they called it. Fukuyama called it that.
And that
Like, it's over.
changed.
We did it.
Yeah, that changed so quickly. And I
Yep.
remember in the past that we talked about like 9/11 being a hinge point like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
certainly it was, particularly for our own country. I mean, it really set us back, I feel like, in so many ways, in terms of the way we handle foreign policy and
Well, and domestic policy. I remember that's what after that was when the Patriot Act was passed,
yes,
and that is something that we will forever regret for the rest
yes.
of our country's existence.
So certainly that was, but I'm what I'm starting to realize now is that it is this introduction. This goes back to what we talked about in our BioShock podcast,
Yeah.
where there was a small group that
Yeah.
unified around an ideology. They all believed in the
Yeah.
same thing, and they all went down together and built this thing that they thought would be a utopia around
Yeah.
an ideology that they all came together on. A small community should have worked, but that there it was the arrogance of the leadership thinking that they had planned for every contingency. There is
Which is just
always
not possible.
there is always something that you will not plan for that will come in and cause a huge disruption to the project of the community you're setting up, and that you will have to adapt to be able to survive. That will always happen no matter what. And we talked about this in that podcast. We believe the internet is one such unforeseen element that humanity was not really ready for, and that we are now having to learn to adapt with, and that we are not adapting to quickly enough.
Right.
Um,
I'd say we're not adapting at all. I don't think people have adapted at all to it.
and so this, to me, is possibly the most important issue, at least in my mind, that we're going to have to wrestle with and really try to find answers to during the course of our lifetimes, those of our fellow humans who are here able to engage with me on this video during this particular time period. We have to wrestle with this. We have to wrestle with how we respond to this, because we are bred to think this way. We have tools at our disposal that put us into contact with people who it feels like are threatening us all the time, when they're
Yeah.
not. They're not.
And they just
They're not threatening you. It feels
Yeah.
like they are. It really feels like it. Trust me, I know exactly what you're feeling. I have those instances myself where I'm browsing the internet and I see something someone says and I just get so annoyed and angry, and I feel this need to respond to that person. I have those same feelings because I have this same DNA in me that has programmed me to respond like that. I think the difference in maybe the last few years, and I was just talking about this with Kason last week, right? I felt like I had a sort of a breakthrough recently, because I had, well, Dude McGuy, one of our patrons who engages with us all
One
the
of our
time here on one of our beasts. I had him and continue to have him sort of sort through our comment sections, because I could not control myself. I literally couldn't for a while, where if I saw somebody say something like that, I felt the need to validate my position, clarify, tell this guy or girl or whoever was saying it why they're wrong. It's in me too. We are all in the same boat as far as that goes. But I've been working really, really hard, especially in the last year or two, to be aware of what that really is that's happening in there. And to say, no, they're not threatening you. I know you feel threatened. I know you feel like you need to fight. You don't. Step away. It's not important. And I feel like just in the last couple weeks, I had a little bit of a breakthrough where I was looking through some comments and I saw something and I just kind of laughed at it instead of getting angry because I
Very nice,
laughed at
very
it
nice.
because it was wrong. I didn't get angry because it was wrong. Like
Mm.
my brain, this part up here, the prefrontal cortex, finally broke through and convinced the amygdala that you can laugh at that. It's okay. You're not threatened. Just laugh it off and walk away. You don't have to fight this person. You don't have to engage. You don't have to prove that they didn't understand what you really meant. You don't have to do that. It's just a video game. And so I wanted to share that, not because I want to preach at people, but because I wanted to share an insight, a breakthrough of sorts that I feel like I've had recently. And I hope that that message can help some of you out there, no matter where you fall in terms of your feelings about the Final Fantasy VII Remake project and this particular game, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. No matter where you fall in your opinion on whether this is a disgrace to the original game and undermining all of its important themes, and whether that's how you feel or whether you feel, no, this is a really groundbreaking, fresh take on this set of characters and world that I loved growing up. And I really like feeling excited about not knowing that some things might be different and being able to theorize that with my particular in-group that's why we appreciate this art that we gathered around. This is the thing that we appreciated about it. No matter where you fall there, you don't have to get involved in the toxicity. You don't have to escalate it to a point where it does some real damage to real people. I was pointed in the direction. I wanted to share this with you, Case, and I didn't get it to you to read beforehand. Unfortunately, I
Okay.
wanted to, but I kind of forgot. And this actually happened several years ago. There was an article that was shared with me by Night Sky Prince, because I was kind of asking him if he could point me in the direction of some examples of some of this fighting online that I could use in sort of building my case, this is the case I wanted to make, but I wanted to use some examples. He got me to think a little bit differently about this, and he sent me this article that talked about the Final Fantasy VII house. It was like a legitimate cult of cosplayers and role players headed by this woman who just absolutely destroyed people's lives, abused them in really, really horrific ways, to the point where certain people who were living in this situation, they believed being homeless. They went and became homeless on purpose and thought it was an escape from something much, much worse. This is the level to which extreme fandom, right, can do real harm to people, real, terrible, abusive harm to people. This is happening. And you can choose not to engage in that. And that's more or less the one thing that I feel like I have any real passion to say about this current project, because there's just no need to stoke any fires there. I've said my piece on it. I don't feel like in doing so that I attacked anyone, but people felt attacked by me. And that really made me consider a lot of things about the internet that I engage with so much, and how I go about talking and conversing with people on these enormous platforms, and why they are such, I don't know, a beacon of this kind of toxicity, or can be. Again, I don't want to paint them as being, because there's a lot of good that comes from it. There are all kinds of people who I've met that I never would otherwise because of these platforms, and because I was able to express myself on this platform, and that people found me through that self-expression. All of that I would not do away with in order to potentially solve this problem I'm talking about. But I do think it's important that people be aware of what's really happening inside, and that they respond in the appropriate way. rather than letting that take over. That's it. That's basically what I wanted to say about this, and I'll pass it to you to say your piece.
The only real big thing I want to say is I want to shout out Mick Discord because he shared a link to Robert Pattinson discussing Final Fantasy VII
Yes.
and specifically talking about the dating scene between Tifa and Aerith,
Yep.
and how one of the reasons he loved Final Fantasy VII was because there were these two great girls you get to choose between.
Yep. I remember
I
that.
thought that was hilarious.
I
It was like
remember
a
that.
merger of the Twilight thing and the whole F7 thing, just like all into one. It's beautiful. We should totally put it up on the screen briefly.
No, totally. Because he was talking with one of his fellow actors for some movie that they were promoting at the time, and trying to convince her why this game was so great. And what she heard was basically this misogynistic point of view behind why, and she like rejected that, right? Because again, this is what I'm talking about with being introduced to people who are diametrically opposed to your ideologies and seeing through a lens that is not accurate about what was really special about that thing. He just expressed it in a way that happened to prick at her bubble.
Oh, that's funny.
And so she dismissed it kind of right off the bat for that reason, right? This gets right at the core of what I'm talking about. And that would not have been the way I would have pitched why that game was amazing. And maybe if I had talked about the fact that this game got me to think about putting gasoline in my car for the first time in my life, maybe she would have had a different opinion about whether that game might be worth looking at. You see what I'm saying? Everybody has a different reason for why they valued it. And from their perspective, from their culture that shaped the way that they think, that's a good thing, actually. And they would feel the need to fight her to defend why the dating simulation aspect is not misogynistic. No, you're wrong. And they would put her into the box of this woke whatever and start, seeing her in that light. And that's what we shouldn't do. That's what we got to fight against, that impulse. In this current climate, this current world, which is racing towards a place where you're going to come across that at a greater and greater frequency every freaking day. How are you going to respond to that? Are you going to escalate it and stoke the fires and cause the gap to become greater between your fellow humans? Or are you cognizant enough to be aware of what's really happening and try to bridge those gaps and quell those fires and calm people down and express yourself better and help people see the common ground that they have, rather than the reasons why we're so different that we can't coexist? Does that make sense?
Okay, I think that's perfect. I think that was a very good way to put it and to kind of wrap it up. I didn't realize there was a whole big thing about that interview.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny.
It is funny. But I can see some people being deeply offended by the way she responded to him.
Okay.
And the reasons why he valued the game. He didn't. He kind of laughed it off. But some people might feel really offended by that. And what I'm saying is that offense is not your choice. That feeling you have of offense, that just happens.
Right, yeah.
We kind of talked about this in recent podcasts too. My sort of like when we got through Final Fantasy 16, I started to kind of feel like I wasn't really jiving with it. It wasn't my choice that I had the feeling that I had in response to what I was seeing and playing. That just happened. I didn't choose to feel that way. The feeling arose inside of me. And what we do is something called post hoc reasoning, where we go back and try to rationalize why I felt that way. And none of that reasoning is the actual reason why it happened. It just happened. You didn't choose it. It just emerged in you. And it was part of, one, your genetics, but two, the culture you grew up in, and 1,000 other factors that formed you into the person that you are, and that emerged inside of you. And now you feel this need to justify or reasonably explain yourself and validate it. And that's most of the time not necessary. You can just say, I like the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. And even though you don't, I don't have to explain to you why. I don't have to justify it. I do. And if you don't have to justify it or argue it or explain it to me. I can shake your hand and say, that's cool, man. Too bad you didn't like it. That's $70 I wish I could give back to you. But I liked it. I'm going to play the next one, the end. And that can be the end of the conversation.
That should be the beginning of this video, was you saying, I like the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
That would be really
the
funny.
lead.
We'll find some way to make a clickbait hook into this to get people to watch it. But anyway, that's what I felt inspired to say about this game now that it's coming out. And it'll be the end of anything I have to say about it. I will not be playing the game. I will not be discussing it. I will not be participating in any way.
I don't know, man. You might have to answer some of my questions. I might.
I'll talk about it with you. I just won't talk
bring
about
you
it.
on along briefly.
That would be something I'd be willing to do, is watch you play this for the first time. But what I'm not going to do is contribute to or even create a place from which that can begin happening in my comment section, is what I'm getting at.
Oh, gotcha.
Like I want to be a person who actively tries bridging those gaps, quelling those fires, and calming that down, rather than creating a place for it to find new life and spread even more. So that's all I'm going to say about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
No, actually, I think I'm good.
All right. Thanks
Sorry,
for watching,
guys,
everybody.
I felt a little sick today. My voice isn't doing great.
Yeah, that's why Kaysen's remote, why he's not here in the studio with me today. But next week, we will start Planescape Torment. We will have Max Derritt on as a guest for all of the episodes of that series. Just to give you a taste of kind of like my feelings right now, I have never been much of a fan of this particular subgenre of RPG.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I'll talk about the reasons why next week when we get started. But this particular type of like Obsidian's like the company that would make games like this, made sort of isometric, text-heavy CRPG that has very little in the way of presentational flair, very little animation.
Yeah.
I have never been a strong fan of this type of game in the past. And then I felt the same way as I was doing my playthrough for this new podcast, although I was enjoying very much a lot of the philosophy, and there's a lot of talking points there that I was very excited to talk about. But something clicked. I don't know why or how. Something really clicked in the last play session that I had, where I was like, oh, I'm actually having a lot of fun playing this game. This is crazy. I think I finally get this genre. So I am so stoked to begin this next podcast series on Planescape Torment. This is becoming rapidly one of my favorite games of all time. So look forward to that. We appreciate all of you. We should probably try to put this, if not at the beginning when we edit this, in the pinned comment at least, so people can see it. There is a vote happening right now on our Patreon for the game that we will play after Planescape Torment. That vote will only be live of the time of the upload of this video for like one more day, maybe two, because we will need to start playing the next game this weekend and preparing for it, because we're done with Planescape now. We're moving on to the next thing so that we can be ready for the next series. So we are doing a vote between Xenosaga 2 and 3 back to back. So that's option 1, finishing the Xenosaga series. Or Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. Those are the two options up on Patreon. If you would like to vote, please head to our Patreon, and at the $5 subscription level, you can you get like voting privileges in terms of deciding what we play. So please go there if you'd like to contribute to that. If you really want it, because there's been people adding me on Twitter X lately that they felt we had abandoned Xenosaga, and I was trying to explain, no, we don't choose. Well, we choose what goes in the vote, but we don't choose if people vote what they vote for. So, but that's there now. So if you want to see us finish Xenosaga, now's the chance to make sure that that happens. Anyways, we appreciate you, everybody. Seriously, thank you for watching, for supporting, giving us a place where we can come and have these types of conversations. I know I won't speak for Kaysen, but I know that for me, this is some of the most enriching sort of parts of my life right now, are these conversations that he and I have together. I look forward to these every week. I feel like I've changed massively as a person based on the insight that we've found, not just from the games we're playing and the philosophies they explore, but from him and the contributions he makes to those conversations. And the fact that you guys support that and watch it and make it possible for us to do this in the midst of our very busy lives and schedules and full-time jobs and families is, I don't know if I can express how much I appreciate that. So thank you. And we'll see you again next week.